Hello, I'm Larry Hoffer, AIAS Executive Director, and I'd like to welcome you all to another episode of Ask an Architect. I'm very excited today to be talking with Cinda Lester, who's a partner at 1212, and we just discovered that we share the same birthday. So I think that's pretty awesome. Cinda, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So let's start with some basics. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and how you got to where you are career-wise?
Yeah, I mean, sort of the short version is my great-grandfather, who I have no memories of. He died when I was 3 years old, but he was an architect in the city of Chicago. And his daughter, my grandmother, I was very, very close with. And so even though I wasn't raised in the city, I was raised in the suburbs. We would spend a lot of time going to the city, going to Marshall Fields. Let's go downtown. Let's shop, those kinds of things. And I remember even as a young child, my grandmother saying, "Oh, there's a building that Bubba, her father, Bubba designed. And, oh, here's a fire station, or here's the school that he designed that, I used to walk past every day." And even as a little kid, I remember thinking that was so awesome that I could touch and walk in and experience something that had come from his brain that, even at that point was, 50 or more years old at that point. And especially, I think maybe even more connection because I didn't know him. It really gave me sort of a connection to him as a person. And so because he was an architect, my mom's side of the family was very, much interested in architecture and buildings and that sort of thing. And my dad's side of the family, my dad and his dad had also been in Chicago, but were photographers. And so my dad's dad had been a forensic photographer actually for the city of Chicago and was very active in fire safety and those sorts of things, having photographed, horrific fires in the city. The shoot, and I'm not going to remember it. The Our Angels fire. I'm not going to be able to remember it. You can edit that out. But anyway, had been very active in photography in the city. And so talking about architecture was just always in the forefront of our minds. And both of my parents are educators. And so having interest in a research project of a cool building in Oak Park, or, hey, let's go to Springfield and look at Frank Lloyd Wright works there. That was just sort of what comes with part of being a librarian's kid. So I knew I wanted to be an architect when I was 4, probably, and I never really wavered.
That's great. What a tremendous personal connection
Yeah.
to that. Had you always enjoyed drawing and all of that when you were young? I mean, because you hear from a lot of people that have become architects that it was either Legos or drawing
Yeah.
buildings or whatever. So did you kind of have that interest as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I was always drawing my earliest memories are sitting and at my grandparents' basement table at the House of the Lakes drawing, and even building sandcastles. And definitely I was building with Lego and Lincoln Logs and bristle blocks, which my brother actually just gifted me for my birthday this year, vintage bristle
Oh,
blocks.
wow.
And so, we've got pictures of us building as kids with all of those things. And, definitely even now a Lego household, we have a Lego room in our house. So I'm always doing that. And I was always the kid who was rearranging my room and rearranging my furniture. So spent a lot of my childhood living just me and my mom. And while she was, getting her PhD and working late, she'd come home and I'd have, the entire house rearranged. So it was just a thing, after school. Hey, let's rearrange the entire house today.
Wow. Very ambitious, but that's really, really cool. So tell me a little bit about 1212 Architects and Planners.
Yeah, so we are actually celebrating our 20th year as of last month. And it really sort of began as a leap of faith. After college, I went to grad school and got a master's in urban planning. And I really was sort of floundering because my passion for architecture sort of changed as what happens so often when you graduate from college and you're all, pie in the sky. I'm gonna solve all the world's problems with architecture, and then you get a real job and you go, oh, okay, maybe I'm not going to do everything I thought I was going to do. And so I was really frustrated with kind of the places I was working in and some of the firm environment, and I really knew that I loved to do residential architecture, and the firms that I worked at, I knew that was just never going to be the case. And so I was very, very lucky that the owner of the company sort of took me under his wing. He called me his go-to girl. And so I was very lucky that I was able to do a lot of things that other, young architects were not having the opportunity to do in the office. And so he really sort of gave me the basis of knowledge because I was able to see projects start to finish, what it was really like running the business part of it, which is very minimally covered in architecture school. And so I just decided that, what, I'm tired of working for him. I'm tired of doing that, all everything for other people, and I just wanted to be my own boss. And I said, okay, I quit. And I had one client who was my mom's best friend, and I said, I'm going to do this. And here we are 20 years later. So, and knock on wood, still very busy.
Well, congratulations on the
Thank you.
20th anniversary. That's a great milestone. What inspires you in working with your clients? I mean, what do you have a particular vision for the designs that you come up with, or is it all kind of individualized based on client needs and wants?
Yeah, I very much believe that I'm sort of the medium to which their story is told, and I very much am a storyteller. And so I like to tell the story of their lives, of their family, of their homes through the architecture and the physicality of the spaces. And so how I would design a space for me has nothing to do with how I would design a space for somebody else. And I often have clients say, oh, what's your favorite style? And I say, well, I could tell you my favorite style, but that doesn't really have anything to do with you. So it's not that I'm an architect who only designs, Victorian homes or prairie style or contemporary. I'm going to do what works best for you. And I really feel very strongly that I need to know my clients on a very personal level. And so much so that I'm actually now very good friends with many of our clients because we get to know each other on such a personal level. Because ultimately, if we're whether we're designing a new house or a kitchen remodel or whatever, I'm going to be asking them very pointed, specific questions about how they live in their house. And people always laugh when I say, well, okay, well, what side of the bed do you sleep on? And a lot of people don't really think about that when you're designing a space, you need to know how people live. And I have two kids in college and a 100-pound dog. So my needs for remodeling of my house would be very different than it was when we moved into this house 18 years ago and I had toddlers. And so I feel very, very strongly that it's really in telling their story. And so we need to have so much conversation and just really sharing of information. And it is not just, it's not the picture, it's not even just the what's it going to look like when it's done. I'm a firm believer that it has to work well, and we can make it look good no matter what, but it has to function well first. And I think that's where I got frustrated a lot in architecture school, was that, we were talking about sort of, pie in the sky stuff, and let's dream and let's make this, a crazy awesome structure. And that's fantastic. But I also need to know how it's going to work, right? And so that's very much how we work with our clients, and every single project for every single client has been different over 20 years.
So you just mentioned architecture school and
Yeah.
how, it might not have been as grounded in reality, and you know, giving you the focus on how to run a business. Is there anything else that you wish you learned in architecture school that you didn't?
I mean, I I guess I should maybe backtrack and say I'm super glad that it wasn't entirely grounded in reality, because if it was, I mean, architecture schools would probably graduate, half the people that they actually do. So I'm really glad that we had that freedom and that design was such a heavy focus. I think personally, it would have been far more useful to me had I taken more business classes, had I taken more. I mean, we had a professional practice class, and, we talked about contracts and that sort of thing. But even that, I don't want to say it was not applicable, but it was very much designed for if you're going to have an office of 10 to 20 people, and I never wanted to do that. And would I have loved taking business classes in architecture school when I was focused on, design and my art minor and that? No, I wouldn't have been interested in it at all. Hindsight being 2020, of course, I wish I had done more of that. That said, there's an awful lot of things that even if I had learned them in school, I probably would have long since forgotten them, and then I, would have been, kind of just going through the relearning process as I took my leap of faith and said, okay, let's start this business. Now, what do we need to do? Now I need a business name, and I need an LLC, and I need to hire an accountant, and, all of those other kinds of things that just come with starting a business, regardless of what the business type is. Um, I, I mean, so I suppose those would be the only things that I really kind of wish that had been addressed a little bit more. Um, the other thing that I suppose I wish that maybe we'd had a little bit more of, and I know that many schools are going towards this some with the IPEL program, is leaning more towards what you're going to take on the exam, on the licensing exams, and being able to do a little bit more of that in school. Um, because I can say that even though, well, at the time it was called IDP, it's now AXP, correct? So, at the time that I was doing IDP, even though I was getting all my hours in the right categories and the right things, there was not a lot of focus on the things that ultimately were on the exam. And so I think some of that time was potentially wasted, because even though I was getting the hours, it really wasn't learning the right things that I was going to be tested on. So ultimately it just became, a huge study for, these exams for a year.
Yeah, and we still hear that somewhat from firm owners
Yeah,
that they hire recent graduates and they don't necessarily have the exact skill, and not even like exact skills, but that they're not prepared well in
sure.
some cases. And so I know that that's something that certainly schools are trying to do and
Yeah,
prepare
yeah.
students.
And I definitely think having experience on a construction site would have been hugely helpful. I had zero before I started working at an architecture firm. And that was, I think, a significant difference between my husband and I, who graduated from the same program. But he worked construction all during school, whereas I worked at Hewlett Packard putting, computer parts together, but I made twice as much money as he did, right? So I was able to pay for school a little bit better. But he had a much better understanding the physicality of how things went together, and certainly drawing wall sections and details he had a far better understanding of than I did, because he had worked construction. And so I think that would have been hugely helpful. I know from the college courses that I've taught and the programs that I've, been a guest critic in, that they do so much more of that now than they did 30 years ago. And I think that's hugely helpful, hugely helpful.
I know that there's been a lot of work to try and make architecture more accessible to women and minority students. Did you feel when you were in school that you were fighting a pretty tough uphill battle as a woman in trying to become an architect?
Absolutely. My husband and I attended the University of Idaho, and our graduating class was 52, 7 of us female out of 52. So I know those numbers are much different now, and then they're much closer to 50-50. I don't think, though, that the greatest uphill battle was in architecture school. I think it was in practice immediately after that, because honestly, that comes the time when you've graduated from college, you're getting married, you're having babies. And that's really a huge, huge, unfortunately, stumbling point for women, because, family is important to a lot of people, and for both men and women, but especially for women, because it's sort of expected that, okay, now you're going to have a baby, and then are you going to take a few years off, and now you're a couple years behind, and now software has progressed without you, and now you don't have that education, and all of those things that come along with that. Or it takes you 15 years to get licensed because you didn't do it before you had kids, that kind of thing. And so that will always be my number one recommendation to everyone, but especially to women: get licensed as soon as humanly possible. Do it before you have kids, because you always think you're going to have more time later, and you are not. And it's just really because it's a huge time suck to study, right? And so are children.
That is true. Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the efforts that NCARB has made in stopping the rolling clock and doing that,
Definitely.
I think has made a difference. But I know that some of the studies that they have done with NOMA, show the difference in the support that men still get for studying for their license, and
Absolutely.
the benefits of becoming licensed
Mhm.
versus women. So,
Right.
I know that that's certainly something that NCARB and AIA and NOMA, that they're all working to change, but
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. And
yeah.
I think absolutely it's still true that, architecture is a white middle-aged man profession. It just is. And until more of us stick around, that's not going to change. Now you get folks like me who sort of start my own business and go off on my own, and I'm not as much as part of the larger profession as I would have been had I stayed at a big firm. And the reality is that's just where my interest lies, where my interests lie. That said, I never found a firm culture, and again, this is 25 years ago, that I felt would have been welcoming to me and to be the type of office that I would have wanted to be in, even if I was not doing residential work. I never felt like I was going to be happy working in a firm of, a couple hundred people, or at a national office, because I was just going to be another number, and I wanted to be a person. I wanted to be me. And there just weren't a lot of women um in essentially positions of power. And there were a couple of women who I had seen. For example, in Chicago, I met Carol Ross Barney when I was in 7th grade. And that was eye-opening to me, because here she was, this famous architect in the city who was running her own business, and her name was on the door. And that was really eye-opening to me. And so just the fact that she existed made a big difference for me. And honestly, that's one of the biggest reasons why I am as vocal about doing these types of interviews. But then also, I do every single career day that any school ever asks me to do, from kindergarten through college, because if you can see it, you can be it. And so I'm very much a proponent of, you know, girl power and telling women that you can do it and being seen, because I know that made a difference for me.
Yeah, I think it makes a difference. I mean, I look at the attendance of AIA's recent Women's Leadership Summit,
Right.
and just, I mean, and they had a wait list that was a couple hundred deep. And so,
Exactly.
clearly there are so many women that either just want the camaraderie to know that the struggles that they have are
Mhm.
shared, and
Right.
kind of advice, or just to have role models, like you said, like,
Yeah.
and I think that's such an important thing, and I feel like that's one of the strengths of AIS is, letting it, first of all, we're seeing a tremendous diversity in the number of students from all over the world who are interested in architecture, but empowering them,
Yeah.
because it's not going to be perfect for a
Sure.
while,
Sure.
but at least
Well,
letting them see.
and even the fact that it's come as far as it has already, is encouraging. Do I wish it was more? Sure, but it's certainly better than what was. Like I said, coming with, 7 women in a class of 52, is, shockingly low. But I felt happy at the time that the 7 of us stuck through with it, because we started probably with 100 and it was whittled down to 7. And I feel that even in the firms that I did work at, one of the firm that I first started working at right out of college, one of the reasons why I started working for them was, one, their phone number was 221-1212. So I felt it was fate. Um, and they used all lowercase letters, which I did at the time as well. Um, but there were 6 women in the office. And I thought that that was the most I had seen in any one office and this was an office of maybe 40 at the time. And within 3 months of me working there, 5 of them left to have children. And they never came back. And so that was really eye-opening to me as well. And then, I was sort of in that same spot too, like, what do I do? And so what we ultimately ended up doing is, when I was pregnant with our oldest son, that's when I left and took my leap of faith. And I said, look, I'm walking off this cliff and hoping the parachute's going to come out. And that was really the best time for us to do it as a family, to have kids and to start the business at the same time, which, again, hindsight being 2020, was kind of crazy because we had like $14 in our savings account. But we made it work, you know,
Yeah, clearly,
yeah,
20 years later now,
20 years later.
So let's talk a little bit about the work that you do, and
Yeah.
your clients. When people come to you, are they more interested in incorporating sustainability and being conscious of climate change and the effects of climate change, the on architecture, and vice versa? Or is that something that you educate your clients on?
Um, the answer is yes to both of those. I think it really depends on the client too. So we have some clients who are super educated and say, look, I want to build a home with ICF and I don't want to use any wood, and we're going to, do solar panels and geothermal and all of those kinds of things. We have clients who come specifically to us for that. Most of our clients don't. Most of our clients honestly have a hard time grasping the long-term benefits of it, and it's really sticker shock up front. So they want to do the things to save the planet, right? But ultimately can't afford to do the things to save the planet. So we do things, even just basic site planning, and where are the trees, and which side are you going to put this on the house, and where do you want your windows, and can we design the roof such that you could put solar panels on the roof, those kinds of things. A lot of pre-planning for future design additions and elements. So I would say we do probably more educating than the educated clients coming to us, but we're sort of starting to see a change in that, not just because the education of the clients is a little bit different, but we've also positioned ourselves to attract different types of clients. So, the types of projects we took 20 years ago, we just don't do anymore. And again, knock on wood, we're fortunate for that, right? To not have to take every client who comes to the door. So we very much try to take the clients who appreciate the design and expect design and want design and don't see the architect as a necessary evil. Because the reality with residential work, most places in the country, you don't need a licensed architect to do residential work. I'm very lucky to live in Illinois, where you need a stamp from an architect to do just about anything. But we do a lot of work in other states that it's just not required. And so we are trying to very much push towards being, a design heavy architect, so that we want people who are very much focused on what their design is going to be and having us tell their story, and not just the folks who say, I just need a 20 by 20 family room. Can you just give me the drawings for that? And it's not that that can't be a beautifully designed space, but it's the people who say, I need a drawing to get a permit. Those are the folks that we have a very hard time educating, because they see us as a necessary evil.
No, that makes sense. I mean, and I think that you talk about the sticker shock, and I sort of equate it to healthy food is so much more expensive
Exactly.
than going to McDonald's or going through a
Right.
drive-through. And it's always amazing because we talk about, these types of crises, the climate crises, the obesity crisis, but then it's more expensive to do the right things.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
but obviously some of that is changing.
And we deal with a lot of that with builders too. And honestly, the contractors who are building our projects, I mean, we certainly have preferred builders who we recommend, and most of our clients use, but sometimes clients will come to us and their neighbor's going to build it, or their brother-in-law, or whatever. And I'm sure this is the case in many places, but in Illinois, which has more municipal sections of government than any other state in the country, has all sorts of different codes depending on where you are. So in my town, we were using the 2018 IRC. We did a project for a client last year that was using the 1996 BOCA. I mean, really, it's insane. And so in those locations, we have contractors who say, well, okay, but I don't have to, put in the R38 insulation that you're wanting in that cathedral ceiling. 96 BOCA doesn't matter, doesn't care. And I said, well, okay, but I do. And so we run into those issues sometimes with builders who are just trying to, save every penny that they can. And I get that for the homeowners, but what I'm trying to do is to educate the homeowners and say, look, yes, you can do less, but do you want to do the bare minimum? Because that's what the code is, right? The code is absolutely the bare minimum you can legally get away with building. And is that really the standard that you want to use? And for us, it's not.
Right. And so on the kind of piggybacking on the ideas of sustainability, what about universal design and accessibility? Is there more understanding of those things? Are you seeing clients want to build homes that they can age in place in? Or again, mixed bag of
Yeah, no, I think definitely that's sort of a standard that we do across the board. And most people see that. I think especially having just survived COVID, right? Where so many people were, sheltering in place together and realizing, okay, grandma now has to live with me during COVID. We can't get grandma's wheelchair into the bathroom. So physically, just some of those things like, holy cow, now we've seen real life in person, what it's like to have somebody not be able to live in our space very well. And so every addition remodel we do, and certainly all new construction, we design with as much universal design and aging in place as possible. And as much as they will allow us. I mean, even just to every single door we're putting in is a 36-inch door. Do we have to? No. But are we going to? Yes, because it makes such a huge difference. And I tell people all the time, and this is, kind of silly sometimes if I ask people to stand in a space, I'm like, take a laundry basket, right? And hold it on the sides and try to walk through a 32-inch door. You're raking your knuckles every single time. So try to do that with a 36-inch door. You walk right through, no problem. And is a 32-inch door less expensive? Yeah, by about $8, right? Is it worth that extra, 6 to 8 inches of space in the hallway and the width and all of that to be able to move freely? For me, absolutely, it's a no-brainer. Now I'm always one who is going to try to make our plans as efficient as possible and to eliminate hallways as much as possible. And then yet here I am saying, let's add more space to circulation space. But it makes a huge difference in the long run. And so I think more and more people are really understanding that now. We have had more clients, especially in new construction, who, because of land costs skyrocketing, have determined that instead of building a ranch house, which is cost prohibitive in a lot of places, not only because of the cost of the land, but cost of excavation and concrete are so expensive that it's less expensive to put in an elevator. And so putting elevators in new construction homes because it's actually less expensive.
Huh.
And so coming into those sorts of things where it doesn't necessarily have to look like, an assisted living facility. Your house doesn't need to look like that. It can still be very functional, can still fit within the look of the neighborhood. It can still be 2 stories or more, and still function the way you're going to need and want it to function in 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, I a number of years ago worked at an architecture firm that specialized in universal design. And it was early on, and
Yeah.
the founder of the firm built a completely universally designed home and trying to educate people on that. And at the time, it was so much more expensive to
Right.
build, showers that had no frame, all of that
Sure.
stuff. And it's becoming more, I think, as more people are really looking to age in place, it's at least seems to be shifting a little quicker than the climate change stuff does.
Exactly. Well, and sprinklers, for example. So, there's still places around here that every new construction home you have to sprinkle. And that's because they have a very powerful, fire chief who's a very strong lobby in their town. And, but every single builder is going to fight it. And, coming from a fire family, right? I will always advocate for sprinklers. Now, that said, is it cost prohibitive for a lot of people? Absolutely. And do we do projects where we will be, 1 square foot under the maximum to avoid having to do sprinklers? Absolutely, because it's either do that or they don't do any project at all because they can't afford the, additional 50 grand to sprinkle the whole house kind of thing. But I think especially with the universal design, even just within, barrier-free showers and roll-in showers. I mean, they just look so much better than they used to, and there's so many more options. And just the fact that I think the design has become something that people are interested in. I mean, most of those showers are sexy, right? They're beautiful because they're clean and sleek and streamlined. And so I think with with people's preferences changing as well, that's something that they're more interested in. Oh yeah, also it is rolling, then that's handy too. And so I think the fact that the products have sort of come along have made a big difference in that as well.
Definitely. So one of the things that we've heard a lot about recently is artificial intelligence and
Mhm.
how it might affect the field of architecture. In your mind, is AI more friend or foe to architects?
Well, I actually had a potential client for the first time ask me the other day if we use AI. Um, and I think they were sort of checking to see, like, am I cheating by, I think that was really where their mindset was coming. Um, and I feel that we really need to embrace it as more friend than foe, because I don't think it's going away, right? So, I mean, much like, 30 years ago, I started working for an office and was still using a pencil on Mylar, right? And it was, oh my gosh, CAD's the enemy, right? And so, which is of course ridiculous now, and people laugh at that thought. And I think it's going to be very much the same with AI. Um, for me, I think where AI can really help us the most, and this is an area where I tell my clients one of the hardest things of my job is to get from their head to my head to paper, right? And so if they are able to potentially put together some ideas into AI and have it spit out an idea of what their house or their kitchen or whatever could look like, then that's a potential way that we could shorten the design process a little bit, again, to try to get an idea from their head so that I can see it so that we can design it. Um, I I really don't think that AI is going to be, doing full construction documents and getting homes built for us. I still think that, again, it's sort of a tool, like, CAD's just an electronic pencil, right? So I think we need to really embrace that and use that for how it can be used that way. It's not ever going to eliminate the need for creativity, whether that's artists or architects or songwriters or poets or musicians. I don't think that's it's ever going to replace any of that. Um, but I think we really need to figure out the best way to embrace it, from the design standpoint. From a writing standpoint, I use AI right now. So, we use it for helping put together blog posts and social media captions and, all sorts of things like that. And I think that's really what it's great at. And why not use something that's great to help you in whatever way you can? I mean, it's sort of no different than using Google or spell check, right? I mean, spell check is not cheating on a document, it's just catching mistakes.
Yeah, I had someone tell me that AI will never completely replace architects because clients will never know exactly what they want to plug it into,
Sure,
and
sure.
AI or whatever is who,
Right.
and come up with a complete thing. So
Right.
they'll
And
their mind
I
always
agree
goes,
with that. I agree with
yeah.
that completely, because yeah, I mean, as well as I do that, clients will come at you with 40 different conflicting ideas.
Right.
And that's sort of our job, is to pick and choose of what we can actually make work.
So you mentioned that one of the things that you do is you go to every career day you can at every level. So for the aspiring architects, the young architects that will watch or listen to this,
Mhm.
what's your advice to them?
Absolutely ask questions. And I tell in my career day presentations to pay attention to your surroundings. So my presentation is sort of good, what was my path to architecture? It included art, it included science, it included math. And really ultimately paying attention to my surroundings. So whether it's, understanding the swirl of a nautilus shell, and whether that's understanding how leaves unfurl and grow, and how many things in architecture are really taken from the natural environment, to even just paying attention to the buildings that are around you, right? Stop and take a look at details on buildings. The building that you've walked by 100 times maybe has a cool brick detail or a cornice detail, and pay attention to those things. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Do not ever hesitate to say, I don't understand this. Can you help me understand this? Or would you please help me understand this? And whether it's of a design professional, whether you send me an email because you really want to know what it's like to be a mom and an architect and a wife and live at home and have Legos on your desk every day, that's fine too. And whether it's, I don't understand how this construction detail works, or can you tell me how does a rain screen work and how do I detail it? All of those things. And whether it's, again, of a professor or an architect that you meet at, an AIS presentation, or, someone you just send a cold call to. Every piece of information that you can get about the profession and about the world around you is going to help you be a better architect.
Yeah, that's so true. So our last question is a question that we try to ask of everybody on Ask an Architect. Do you have a hot take on architecture right now? And if so, what is it?
My hot take on architecture right now is, as my grandmother would say, get while the getting's good. We are a profession that comes and goes in waves, and it is up and down, and the highs are really high and the lows are really low. And you kind of just got to be able to figure out, can you handle that type of profession? And you gotta, do the work while it's there and kind of try to have a backup plan for when it's not. And I think you just got to ride the wave, and right now the wave is high. We're doing really well right now. And, how long is that going to last? I don't know. That said, don't be terrified by listening to the news of, oh my gosh, we're going to come into the world's worst depression, and, we're all going to be, in bread lines again. Okay, well, I personally, as an individual, can't do much to stop that. So I just need to figure out the everything I can do to kind of go with the flow as much as I can in the meantime. So I don't know if that's really a hot take or not, but
It's good advice, whatever it is.
yeah. So
Well, Cinda, thank you so much for
yeah.
taking some time to talk today. Really definitely enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah,
And
me too. I appreciate it. And I'm so thankful for AIS. I am a former AIS president, University of Idaho, 1994,
nice.
1995. And our daughter is a brand new AIS member at Kent State University.
Ah,
We just
that's
dropped her
great.
off for a freshman year, architecture school. So very proud. And, I learned so much through AIS that I never would have really been exposed to. Certainly doing things through chapter presidents and forum and all of those kinds of things that, not every AIS member gets to do. But I met some of the most important people in my life through AIS, who I still am in contact with and see regularly. And even just through attending speaker series and things like that, there was so much exposure brought to us through the organization, and understanding of what not just AIA as a whole does, but just being part of an organization can mean for architecture. And I really found that was hugely important. And especially as a woman in the profession, I felt that was hugely important. So I'm always thankful to AIS for getting me where I am.
Well, thank you. We pride ourselves on being able to help students navigate the path and connect them not only with each other, but with professionals. So definitely appreciate your time, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's great talking to you.
You too.